Welcome to Livestream Stars. I'm Ross Brand. This is the show where we feature talented broadcasters delivering high-quality content across Livestream platforms. And Livestream Stars is brought to you by Livestream Universe for everything live streaming. Check it out, livestreamuniverse.com. We also have a website just for the show. It's livestreamstars.tv. You can see upcoming guests and view replays of past shows. And eventually we're going to move all that stuff to Livestream Universe. So there'll just be really one site where you can get most everything you need relating to Livestream Universe. And we also are continue to do daily updates. So if you haven't had a chance, check that out on our, they're always posted first on the Facebook page, facebook.com/Livestream Universe. And we'll be back on Thursday night for Livestream News with Monique Hoffman, host of Cue the News, 7 p.m. right here on Fire Talk. And then Monday for Livestream Stars with Rachel Moore of Really.social and the Let's Livestream Twitter chat. And now to tonight's guest, Jim Collison. Welcome. Jim runs theaverageguy.tv, hosting podcasts and producing shows about tech. His shows include Home Gadget Geeks, Cyber Frontiers, Home Tech Tips, Reviews, and How-Tos. Jim also hosts Ask the Podcast Coach with Dave Jackson Saturday mornings on Blab and works for Gallup. He partners with the Talent Resources team to recruit and retain world-class system and database administrators and software developers who support Gallup's clients and the company's internal systems. But what we're really also interested in is that Jim's doing some podcasting over at Gallup as well. And you can find those podcasts at coaching.gallup.com. And why don't we start there, Jim? Great. First of all, great to have you on. I've enjoyed Ask the Podcast Coach on Saturdays, whether I'm actually watching it live or I'm listening to the previous week as I'm driving somewhere. So it's great to talk to you. I'm so glad
Ross,
you
great to be
could
on.
come
Thanks
on.
for having me. Man, when you put it that way, holy cow, I need a vacation after all.
Yeah.
Man, I do way too much. Yeah, we do some webcasting. We call it's podcasting. You may hear me refer to it on the Gallup site as webcasting, and I can tell you the story of why we did that. But thanks for having me on. Great to join your audience. I'm hoping to learn a little bit about what you do here as well. Every opportunity is a learning opportunity is what I say. So thanks for having me on.
Exactly. Yeah, so tell me what you're doing with Gallup as far as the podcasts.
Yeah, it goes back about 7 years when I started podcasting with a buddy of mine over at homeservershow.com. He got me started, and so that started my own network about 6 years ago doing that. And then at Gallup, we have this product called the Strengths Finder. It's an assessment you can take. It's a web assessment you take. You can discover your top 5 things about what you're best at. We have a whole coaching community around it. And 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago to the month now, we started thinking about rolling this out into training for coaches. And they wanted to create this global coaching network. And I raised my hand and said, hey, I have a great way to do professional development and training globally and to do it for almost no money. They looked at me funny. Seriously, we can do it for almost free. It'll just be the time of folks, putting time in to get this done. And they said yes. And so back, I think it was May of 2013, we started our very first program called Called to Coach. It was really a coaching program to kind of reach our strengths coaches, kind of what we call them, Clifton strengths coaches around the world. And so we started with one show. We did it every 3 weeks. We did them on YouTube, live on YouTube at the time. And then I just ripped that audio out and make a podcast out of it. When we kind of test marketed this idea of the word podcast, nobody knew what it was. 3 years ago, we'd say webcast, and they'd be like a webinar. And we said, yes, like a webinar. And we went with it because that was like what they could, that group could really closely associate to that idea. So the word webcast stuck, and I have been militant about it, but it's worked for us. If you asked our listeners, they would say, yeah, we like the term webcast, and so it's worked. So that has grown into really 3 on 4, almost 4 programs now that we do called the Coach Theme Thursday, where we take one of those individual themes in the Strengths Finder assessment. We go 45 minutes deep dive into it, which is a ton of fun. We're in season 2 of that program now, which has been good. I get great feedback on that program. We're doing a new one, Educational Insights, that we're kind of doing around some of the work we're doing in higher education, which is fun. We're only 2 into that, so that's a brand new podcast. Okay. And then since last November, we've been recording Frank Newport. He's our editor-in-chief of Gallup.com, and this is a straight, I record him. It's just him 12 minutes, all the best information about Gallup. So we do a variety. Sometimes we ask for input. Sometimes we have a chat room. In the case of Polling Matters, Frank's podcast, we just blast it out. No live audience. We don't record it live. So we're just doing, we're trying to take advantage of all the media, all the ways we think people will consume it. We just crossed over, a couple months ago, we crossed over 10,000 monthly downloads for all the shows in the channel, which we're super excited about. Our next goal is 50. So we've got some work to do. Our blog that's associated with it, which is a Blogger blog, probably the worst way to do a blog ever, but we started it on Blogger 4 years ago, and we just left it there, is coming up on the 1 million view mark. And so we've been really happy with the results that we get all around our products, all to keep our customers and our coaches connected to us.
Now, how much video are you using in terms of the different shows? So some of the shows you're recording on Google Hangouts or?
Yeah, so everything gets recorded on Google Plus to begin with. That goes to YouTube. Polling Matters, we don't use the video. That's the only one we don't use the video on. That's audio only. The rest of them have a video component to it. And we've actually found that really, really useful to create this connection. This last week, we did the Clifton Strength Summit here in Omaha. About 750 coaches from all around the world, literally all around the world. We have them from everywhere come in. And I just hung out in the crowd. And Ross, I got a little mobbed by the crowd. They recognized me from the videos, right? Which is what we want, right? We want that audience engagement. We want that brand recognition. And they kind of saw me as the face of what we do from a webcasting standpoint. And so it was really rewarding to get all those, hey, thanks for when your listeners get a chance to meet you and they say, thank you for spending every Thursday with me, fill in the blank, right? In the car, whatever. Right. That's incredibly rewarding. But we realized we got enormous amounts of engagement in what they're doing. The fact that they could find me and then recognize me and then know that's what's going on there was just a real testament to the brand connection they had made, right? And yeah, I'm the face of it, but ultimately they're connecting to our brand. So it was really, really important.
Wow. This is quite an ambitious schedule you have there, considering that this is not you also have the rest of your job to do, right? It's not like, they give you a studio and say spend all day producing.
Yeah, it's a part-time
shows,
deal
right?
for me. I spend most of my time recruiting and managing our internship program. So we have a college and a high school local. So we have some, we'll start with 40 some high school kids who come onto our campus and work with us. Then I have 25 college kids that we recruit for every single year. So I spend a good majority of my time doing that. The webcasting at work only happens because I have a team. So this is the great part about webcasting in the enterprise is I have 2 blog writers. I have a video editor who does my audio as well. I have an admin that helps with sending microphones out and making sure guests have microphones and that they're scheduled and that they're going to show up on time. And then I've got a kind of a leadership team around me that helps pick guests and some of those kinds of things. So it is at work. It's definitely a team effort. All the tech stuff that I do, it's me and me alone, right? I write the blog post. I schedule the guests. Now, the production quality is a little bit lower, to be honest with you, just because I don't have time. I mean, I get home Friday night. I start producing my Thursday night podcast. Usually I have it done first thing Saturday morning. I meet with Dave Jackson at 9:30 Central for Ask the Podcast Coach. We do that till 11. I get done. I post the rest of the show. And I try and have that done by 1 or 2 o'clock Central Time. So a good chunk of my weekend is taken up. The other podcasts that you mentioned, like Home Tech Tips, every once in a while. Cyber Frontiers, about every 3 weeks on that one. So some of the other programs that I do are Home Gadget Geeks is really the only other weekly podcast besides, it sounds crazy to say besides Ask the Podcast Coach. That I do on a regular basis, and then all the work podcasts, and I do those during the work day.
Right.
There's a caveat. There's 2. One I do either in Singapore or in Sydney, and I go in at 9 o'clock Central Time PM to do those. And then we do India, and that's midnight. So I go in at 11, start the show, get things going. I do the show from midnight to 1, and then I try and come home and grab a little sleep before I got to be back in. That's 1 time a month, so it's super manageable, right? Super manageable, but to be able to talk to people, to be able to talk to our coaches in India is huge. Like from a brand recognition standpoint, we are very new to India. So to be able to have those videos to reach those people in India or in Singapore or Sydney, wherever. It's a big deal.
That's awesome. Now, for your tech show, you're using Google Plus Hangouts as well.
Yeah, we're pretty much Google Plus all across the board. I'm super familiar with it, and it works really well.
Okay. And do you have a live audience, or you're just using that to record the interview and then?
Yeah, no, we do the same thing at work that I do with my tech show. So Chatwing is our chat provider. The layouts are exactly the same, video on top, a chat on the bottom. We'll get here in the US for the live shows for Gallup. I get 35 or 40, maybe 50 sometimes. We've had as much as 150 show up, depending on the guest, which is crazy, Ross, to think about 150 people live. That is, when I was starting the tech show 6 years ago, 5 people live was pretty incredible, right? I think we've got a bunch out there today, 15. This is about what I get for my tech shows when I do them I do them in the same time slot, right? 15 to 30 seems to be a really good live number for most people. But at Gallup during the day, we get, like I said, anywhere 30 to 60 maybe in their live US, different overseas that we're still struggling a little bit. They aren't catching like they do here in the US as far as we can catch them live. The culture just isn't there yet. So I'm okay. Those get hundreds of views after the fact. And that's the beauty of this, right? Is it's time shifted. It can be done anytime.
Right. Now for the chat, that's independent of Google, so you could use that chat no matter what platform.
Chatwing is who we use for that. It's great. Their free service works just fine for us. Although the chat here in Fire Talk is actually pretty good. Watching it here, this would be a good replacement for it. But Chatwing works well. It allows you to log in with like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and just about any social thing you can think of, which is handy because we have strengths coaches aren't the most technical, so it gives them an easy way to log in without creating a new account. We get lots of interaction on it too.
And is that an expensive product, or is that something?
It's free. They have a free tier that works great. You don't really need to. If you want to take off their branding, or if you want to add some, there's some other things. Like if you're going to run it on a site that's secure, HTTPS as opposed to just HTTP. Most people are moving to secure sites. You're going to pay for that service. I got around it by creating a separate WordPress instance that's branded exactly like my averageguy.tv page. My blogger page isn't secure either, so it works just fine there. Yeah, it's funny. We use Blogger, and everybody's like, mine is Blogger. I'm like, you know what? We got 1 million views on that thing, so it's obviously working, and that's completely free too. Ross, we have done this is an enterprise, and we could pay, but my challenge has been, I challenged the team when I started. We're going to do this. I can show you how I can do this for almost no money. And so I have taken the approach to we only pay for things when we absolutely have to. And so far, I pay for very few things. You really can do this even in the enterprise, really inexpensive.
If the free tools work, why not use them, right?
I exploit them every chance I get.
But I think the chat thing is interesting to a lot of people here, because with these platforms, kind of, you don't know which one's going to be around, which one's not. A lot of people are looking at using encoders like Wirecast or OBS to, really kind of produce the show themselves. And you need that chat, right? That's what separates a live show from just recording a podcast or a webcast and putting it up on YouTube. And so if there are good free options out there for people to use, Chatwing is what you said you use. That's great information.
Yeah, no, I
people.
Depend on it. Like, I don't know, Russ, I don't know how to do a show without a live audience. Like, I'm terrible at it. Whenever we're doing just recording, I recorded one of the senior engineers from InFocus who makes the Kangaroo PC. We had him on the other night, and it was just we did it like an hour before the live show, no live audience. I'm just not as crisp or as sharp as when I've got a live audience out there and I know they're listening right now. And so I really prefer a live audience, and then I really love the feedback. So if you're listening right now, we got a bunch out there and you have questions for us. I thrive on questions from the chat room. So just drop your question there. We'd love to answer it.
Definitely. And, I want to ask you, for a lot of people who are doing video and actually haven't really gotten into podcasting, podcasting seems a little confusing, right? There's an RSS feed, and there's where do I host it, and then where do I distribute it to, and how do I edit it, and all of a sudden it sounds kind of difficult when a platform like this, you basically click a button and you're doing a show and you get a video afterwards. So could you kind of break down because I think a lot of people who are watching here probably are debating, like, should I take the audio and make a podcast out of my show? Should I not do it? Can you kind of break down, like, what are the simple steps or the complicated steps, but the essentials that people need to kind of go through in order to make that happen? If it's something
it is
they want to do.
complicated, I think. And anytime you're taking a complicated process, it's really important to just take it one step at a time. Like, do the next thing. Matt Damon at the end of The Martian says, just solve one problem at a time type thing. Don't try and eat the entire elephant. So really, when you think about podcasting, if you're creating the content and you have the video, you already have the audio, and there's no sense in doing anything but just ripping that right out of the video. So Audacity has an FFmpeg encoder that you can use inside Audacity. Again, Audacity is free. You don't have to buy Audition or have any expensive software to get it done. You can start with that. When you just dump the video in, and it will show you the audio, and you can save it out as an MP3. So that's my right for as far as creating the content and getting the MP3. It's no simpler than that. And there's lots of instructions on how to get that done. The second thing you need to think about is a host provider, right? So there's two different things. There's a website provider. That's the person who, when you go to your website, yourdomain.com, that's where that's showing. And then it'd be really smart to get somebody to kind of host those files. And there's a whole variety of companies that do that. The three that I recommend: Libsyn, Blueberry, Spreaker. Those are the three. I use Spreaker at work. We use Spreaker for that. They'll all do the same thing at about the same price. So just choose the one and all they're doing, right? So serving up your files, especially these are the MP3 files you're making. You got to find a way to get them to people. People are going to download them. That bandwidth's not free. And a lot of media providers, like if you have a website at GoDaddy or some of those, they're not going to offer to host your files for you. They're going to shut you down if they all of a sudden the bandwidth picks up. If you get popular, that happens every time. So one of those three to host your media files. And basically you put your media file there, and there's a couple different ways to create an RSS feed. Libsyn and Blueberry can do that for you. You can do it in the PowerPress plugin with WordPress if you're going to go that way. By the way, 1/4 of the web runs on WordPress right now, which is just an incredible stat. So if you think about WordPress and how much it's being used, WordPress, I think, is the easiest way to get a podcast started. There's a PowerPress plugin for it that will automatically generate your RSS feed, and then you can do anything. So think of that RSS feed like an address, really. It's just a website. It's a location for someone to go and get updates to what you're doing on a regular basis, right? You don't want to have them to keep coming back. And is it out there? Is it there yet? Is it there yet? Is it there yet? Right.
And that's right. And that is different from the RSS that your blog creates.
Well, yes. If you have a separate blog RSS for the things you think you've got these posts that are coming out, and that's an RSS feed.
Right. Like I do my blog posts for each of the video shows that I do. Right. And then I embed the video from YouTube, or I was actually using the Blab version of the podcast press. Can't think of what it's
Simple Podcast Press or Simple Podcast.
But it's called Simple Live Press. I think it was by the same guy, Hanny, the same guy who made that. But obviously, I'm not using Blab. But so there's an RSS feed for all my blogs, whether they're news blogs or whether they're blogs about shows. Right? It's going to be a different RSS feed. Does it have to be? Is it better if
you were going to have a blog and a podcast, and every blog was going to have a podcast in it, right? Then you'd want a container that has all of that, all one thing. If you're blogging and podcasting, and not every blog has a podcast in it. In other words, sometimes you're going to do a post that doesn't have an MP3 in it. Right. Then you want to separate those out. And so think of it like containers. I'm giving containers. I got Tupperware containers, and I'm giving them to you. In that container is going to be all my blog posts. So Ross, here you go. This is an RSS feed Tupperware container with all my blog posts in it. Oh, but I want audio. Okay. That's not going to every time. It's not a complete subset of everything that's in this container. Let me create a separate container for you. And every time I do a blog post that has an MP3 in it for the podcast, I'm going to drop it into this container. And then I'm going to say, hey, here it is. Okay. Because it's kind of annoying in your podcast player when I just get a post from you and there's no MP3 in it. Like what? And most podcast listeners expect a feed to only have MP3s in it. So you can, the beautiful thing about WordPress and PowerPress, this plugin that you can use, is you can designate both category. So you, like, if you have a podcast category, that's your podcast name, you can designate that RSS feed. And every time you're going to post a podcast, you put that category in there. And that tells the software, hey, I've got an MP3 in here, make sure it gets delivered to my customer. Or they have a thing called channels, same exact idea. Every time I post it, it says, and that's all you really want is it's like a smart mailman. Every time you post it, he knows exactly where to deliver it. Am I going to deliver it here with all the blog posts, or am I going to deliver it here in just the RSS feed? Once it is complicated. I'm not going to lie. This is why there's all these podcast coaches out there, because it's a little complex to set up. But if you take it one step at a time, set up a blog, get that going, right? Practice your podcast, get those going. Then set up a podcast RSS feed and get people listening to it that way. If you take it just one step at a time, it's not so hard when you just kind of take it one step at a time. Don't try and do all the social and all their social sharing and some of those things. Reserve that for a little bit later after you've been doing this for a while.
And if you want to do a blog about your podcast, right, and embed the player in the blog and, do your notes and all that kind of stuff, links, that will be a part of your blog. Correct. RSS, right? You'll still have the separate RSS that just sends the audio.
Yeah, whatever you put on that page it'll just make it to whoever you're sending that feed to. If you think it like a stream of a river, they're going to get that water. And then the other RSS feed, and in some cases, I have, I'm using channel podcasting over with the PowerPress player. I actually have a video small and a video large feed that have their own RSS feed. So my customer or my listener said, hey, we'd love to have video. And I said, you guys are crazy, but okay, here's some video. So every week I crunch down that video. I compress it like it's big when you put it on YouTube, right? So I compress it down into something manageable and we call it video large. And then I compress it even smaller and we call it video small. And those are on 2 channel RSS feeds for customers who just want to register for that. So there's a lot of capabilities there. It's pretty technical, but again, if you take it one step at a time, you can do it.
So you're using the PowerPress plug?
Yeah, PowerPress
plugin. I was thinking of Simple.
Yeah. No,
Simple.
That's Blueberry provides this PowerPress plugin, right? Blueberry. It's free for anyone that wants to use it. You don't have to use Blueberry's hosting, but yeah, the Blueberry PowerPress plugin is dynamite.
And if you use that plugin, that gives you your RSS feed, so you don't even really have to understand it.
You just choose. You kind of choose how people are going to get that feed. Whether it's going to be every time you're going to designate a podcast. Are you going to designate a category? Or are you going to designate it by a channel? And then once you make that determination, that creates the RSS feed for you. You just copy and paste that code and put it into iTunes or put it into whatever to make it work.
And is that something you do one time and then all your podcasts will automatically
once
go
it's
there?
set up, it's kind of set it and forget it. And that's the beauty of it, is you kind of got to work through it the first time. But man, once all that stuff is in, it just does it automatically every time you post.
So I guess the other step to consider is where you're going to distribute it, right? iTunes, you're going to put it to SoundCloud. What do you recommend as you get off the ground places that you want to send it to? For most people, just 2 places to really worry about. One is iTunes for sure. They are the big player in the space. Mm-hmm. And all you're doing is giving them that RSS feed. They're saying, okay, we got it. And anytime anybody requests this from an iPhone, we're going to direct them to your RSS feed. You're not downloading it there. They're not keeping your files. Nothing's there except a record of your RSS feed and maybe some of the descriptions of the podcasts that you do. But iTunes for sure. Second, and we haven't gotten a lot of traction on this yet, but I think in the future this will make a difference, the Google Play Store. So you can submit your podcast RSS feed to Google Play with your Google account. It'll set it up. It'll be available in their properties. Between those 2 properties now, it covers, I'm going to say 85% of all the other podcast players and all the other podcast sites. There's other things you can do. There's other places you can register it. And so if you want an example of that, I think if you go to the averageguy.tv, I have a tab. Let's see if sometimes I even have to look at that myself. I have a tab called Other Networks, and that's a list of everything where I put my podcast. So the averageguy.tv, look for the tab.
And I think it's just other networks / other networks. I always forget, but it doesn't matter. Click on that tab and you'll see this whole list of where I put it, right? So it's a list of my RSS feed. I do YouTube, Spreaker, Audio Boom, Podomatic, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Shout Engine, Mixcloud, Audio Mac, archive.org, podcast.com. But don't do that. Like grow into that. Those are all the various places, and then it includes like streaming services like Stitcher and TuneIn, Mixler and Spreaker are some other places that I have it. So there's kind of a list of the ones I've curated that I think work well enough that I get a few hits. Or Podomatic, which is interesting. I originally started with Podomatic as my host, quickly realized this is not going to scale very well. I should probably self-host from that standpoint. And I still get 100 listens on Podomatic. Why would I abandon those listeners out there? They found me there. It has an RSS feed of sort that people are listening to. So every week I upload to Podomatic as well, and I get 100 listens.
Yeah, Alberto Gomez says, what about Stitcher? It's a great directory.
Nope, I mentioned Stitcher in there. I think Stitcher numbers are dropping at the moment. And so, again, it's a super thing. It's a super easy thing. You go over to Stitcher, you submit your information, you're done, right? You go in the Stitcher catalog and you're there. I know some who are listening, I don't get gigantic Stitcher numbers. You want to be there. The key would be for a brand new podcaster. We say this all the time on Ask the Podcast Coach. The key is add maybe one of these a week. So, get in there, figure it out, add it to Stitcher, add it, maybe you could upload it to Spreaker. There's all kinds of ways you can game the system. The trick is to get those other two first, though. Get iTunes. There we go. Sorry. Get iTunes, get Google Play, and you might consider uploading it to YouTube. I think you have to be on YouTube. I guess I'm assuming you're already there if you've got the video, but you got to be on YouTube. I mean, that's the number 2 search engine in the whole universe is YouTube. So make sure you're taking advantage if you have video content or even audio with some slides. Not a bad way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess I'm trying to think the other steps. I'm assuming most people here understand basics of like hosting a show and things like that. So I'm sticking to the things that are specific to like podcast challenges, right? So you want to get started. Do you start with show number 1, or do you have a bunch that you batch together, or what is the best way when you're first coming out? I have like probably 35 shows in the bank that I could, I don't think I'm going to start with 35 at once. But I might not want to just start with one, right? I mean,
it just depends, Ross, to be honest, what you're trying to do and the guru you're listening to at the moment. Here's what I like. If you're thinking about starting this podcast thing and you haven't done it before, one, sit down and create 3 to 5 podcasts and then never do anything with them because they're going to be terrible. In most cases, your early ones are awful. You think they're good and they're your baby, right? You birth them, you put so much time and effort into it, and you're like, these are great. They're not. They're never great. A year from now, you'll go back and listen to them and go, oh my God, how did I ever let this out into public? This is awful. Okay, so create 3 to 5, go through the whole process, editing, work on them, maybe share them with some friends. This is a good use of SoundCloud, right? Even their SoundCloud free account, just upload them to SoundCloud. You get it, I think, 3 hours for free. Share them with friends. You can actually get feedback in various areas right on SoundCloud. Right. SoundCloud's great for this. I wouldn't use them as host provider, but they're great at this. Then once you've gone through that process of working through it, you may realize podcasting was a bad idea. So if you can't create 3 to 5, guess what? You're not going to create more than that when you get going. By the time you're done with 3 or 5, you should have a list of 10 titles or 10 more topics that you're going to do. And yes, I said 10. It's really important. You got a lot of great ideas going forward. And that's either 10 topics or 10 people you're going to interview or 10 things. You have to be able to articulate them if you're going to go forward. Because this podcasting stuff is not easy, right? You get 7 or 8 into it and you're like, oh man, this is a ton of work. Yeah, it is. It's a ton of work. And to keep track of all these things and to take negative feedback from people. I mean, you take a beating when you're first starting doing this. Then you'll wonder if anybody's even listening, right? You're doing all this work and you're like, so have 10 shows ready to go. Get 5 practiced and toss them. Never let anybody listen to those and then start. Now, so there's some gurus who say get a bunch in the can and release them all at once so you can get that new and noteworthy bump. If that's what you want to do, hey, do it. It works for some, doesn't work for others. It's great. If you want to start with just 0 and then go 1, have a pilot show where you kind of explain what you're doing, and then every week or every other week. I do know this, like whatever you're going to do, just be consistent with it from an audience standpoint. Audiences love consistency. They'll start listening to you. And I think really, there's a magic number of 7. If you can get back past 7, you're in good shape. A lot of podcasters quit before that. 30 is the next level. If you get up to 30, you're doing actually really, really well. I think once you get to 30, then the magic starts happening. Like you are really, because you've gotten 30 hours of practice. If your show's an hour, whatever it is, fill in the blank. You've gotten all these hours of practice. And then I think it starts getting really, really good. So if you're going to do this for the long haul, if you're thinking about that, the other lesson I've kind of learned, and this has been one that's kind of new, is I've started breaking up some of my podcasts into seasons so that I have a defined start and end. That way you don't have this pressure like, hey, I'm starting and this is going to last forever. I mean, that's for some people, that's a little daunting. Just say, hey, your first 10 podcasts, this is what we're going to do. And then I'll reevaluate. If we're going to keep going, cool. If we're not going to change the topic, you've got a good way. But if you start with 10 in mind and you're like, we're going to do this 10-part series, it's giving you a way out where it's not awkward when you leave.
It's very interesting what you said about the numbers 7 and 30, because in doing these shows, which are somewhat similar to what you would do in a podcast in a lot of ways, right? I was 7 shows into doing this show when I went on vacation for a week, and I took a week off or 2 weeks off. And I remember thinking, do I want to keep doing this? Because it's like, wow, it's kind of nice having some free time.
Yeah, right on. It's a labor of love, Ross. I mean, yeah.
And then I got back and I was around 30, and I sort of asked myself the same question, and I'm like, no, I kind of like now what I got going on. I don't think I want to stop.
Well, the beauty is by 30, you're finally getting some customer engagement back. You're starting to hear from your listener, right? You're starting to, they're tweeting you, they're asking you questions. The Facebook group might be going, however you decide to do that. Reddit might be taken off. So then it starts getting good. And that's like, but you got to put the time in. You can't cheat it. You just got to put the time in and get 30. By the way, I mean, 30 is what, 7.5 months if you're doing it weekly. So you've got, 6.5 or something like that. It's time, and it's every week, and it like clockwork.
Right.
You got to do it. You got to record it. Sometimes you record it and you're like, that's awful, but I don't have time to re-record it. And so I'm just going to put it out there, and you feel bad. So it's a process, and it takes a little bit. I always tell people, hey, set yourself up for success by making it as easy as possible the first time around, and make sure you want to do it. And so don't commit to doing it forever. That's why I like this 10-show season. Right. This is frankly why the networks do this with television, right? They're not exactly sure if it's going to be a hit or not. So before they commit, right, they do 23 or 12 and like, hey, we'll pay for 12 and then we're going to reevaluate. Take that same approach. It's worked in TV. You can do it too.
When you get overworked, you can always sort of mentally trick myself. Well, I'm going to go to the end of the season, and then I'll give myself a break. And if I don't want to continue, and then of course, I always like when I get to that point where I know I'm going to have some time off or whatever. It's sort of like the first night is like, yeah, maybe I'll do something else, and then the next day I'm like learning how to do something new, and I'm starting to work on it again. So, guys, we're talking with Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv, Ask the Podcast Coach. I could ask Jim questions for about 5 more hours on this stuff, but would love to get your questions in. So feel free to call in or throw your questions into the chat. Alberto Gomez asks, what are your thoughts about micro podcasting or platforms like Anchor?
Periscope, Facebook Live, Anchor, all those. Hey, I think it's a great way of engagement if your audience is there. So if you can reach people there and it's working, man, go for it. Is it a podcast? Who cares? Like, who cares if we call it a podcast or not? If you are reaching, this is all about audience engagement, not about the freaking term we call it, right? I get really burned out on people defining for me what a podcast is and what a podcast isn't. I don't really care. At work, we call them webcasts because we asked the audience and they said, we don't know what a podcast is. And so I always say, whatever is helping you reach people, whatever is helping you, if you're starting a podcast, it might be a smart idea to have some idea why. Okay, What do I hope to get out of this? Is it fun? Is it a hobby? Do I want to make money? Do I want to reach people? Do I want to evangelize something? All those things work. And then whatever you're doing, if it's working, just keep doing more of it. I mean, that it doesn't take too much more thought than that. Just keep going with it. So, I'm not a big fan of Facebook Live. I kind of think that's going to come and go. I think there'll be a version of it that will eventually work. But I know people who are having tremendous success with Facebook Live. And so, hey, if it's working for you, don't let anybody tell you like what can and can't work. If you ask me for my opinion, I'm going to give it to you. Like I just gave you my opinion. I'm not a big fan of Facebook Live. However, if it works, keep going with it. So, yeah, I think if you can fit it in and it fits your demographic or your audience, I'm not a big Snapchat fan, but I know lots of people on Snapchat. If it's working for you, go with it.
Right. What do you consider, and I know this is a question, and you really almost just answered it in the sense that, it's all over the map and it's what works, but it's one of those questions that I've heard discussed a lot. What's the ideal length for a podcast? Is it 18 minutes? Is it 22 minutes? Some people do a 1 to 2 minute podcast every day. Some people do a 2.5 hour podcast or whatever they feel like. There's no right or wrong. But what do you think is a good length if you want to encourage people to say, let's check this out, let's try it out? It's substantive enough that I want to listen, and it's not so long that I got to give my whole day to
it. If you're new to podcasting, I would say anything 20 minutes or less, because people will look at that number and say, how much time do I have to commit to watch this whole thing? Now I commit that cardinal sin every single week on Home Gadget Geeks because we're 90 minutes at least. I stay between 60 and 90 for sure. However, the audience I've built wants long play. They want more than less. That's what they've told me, and that's who I've attracted, and so that's the audience. But we do with Frank Newport for Polling Matters, the podcast we do at Gallup, no more than 12 minutes. That's all we do. He sketches that out he does some TV work with it as well. And so we have a very concise, and that's what people like from that standpoint. However, we go 45 minutes on the ones we do. The other two that we do, called the Coach and Theme Thursday, are 45. Folks love that. The average commute, I think, is 24 minutes. And so if people are listening to it in the car, some derivative of that, right? Either 20 or 40 kind of gets them there and back, or it gets them there. I don't know how much time you have. Dave Jackson says this, and he attributes it to somebody else. There's no such thing as too long, only too boring, right? And so Right. It's one of those things where you think, hey, what are you trying to do? Some folks where it's a hobby podcast, hey, hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, people will listen. If they listen to it, it's perfect. Other people I've seen to do podcasts that are very concise and to the point, and it's like everything. I've done them all. This is like everything you need in 2 minutes. I've done those. I've done 15, I've done 45, there's no right answer. It's like, what do you have to say, and is it interesting? That's the length your podcast should be.
What is the point of numbering your episodes? I see a lot of people do that. You see it all over the place. This is episode 30. This is episode 50. Do you want to put that in the title? Do you not want to put it in the title? For these shows, I always put the name of the guest in the title. That's how I remember the show, by the name of the guest.
Let me tell you how I think that started. So I think Leo Laporte started that because he came from TV. And in TV, they number the episodes. You just never know. Like, they're there. That's just, and we're not used to consuming. It's never shown. Like, you never see Friends episode 47. You just don't see that. Right. But if you go on IMDb or any of those, the episode numbers are all there. Well, Leo came out of TV. He had done tech TV and some of those. And so I think when he started podcasting, he just naturally added those in, thinking they were behind the scenes. Well, in podcasting, it's in the title, right? People put them in the title. We recommend you put them at the end of the title. It looks funny if you go to iTunes and you've put your title, your episode up front, it says episode 47. We only get a certain number of characters before that stuff starts disappearing. And it's really important that you put your guest or you put the topic or some of those things in your title. So do you need to do it? Absolutely not. I just think Leo got it going. A bunch of people copied Leo. We copied a bunch of other people. And it was there's an old story about a grandmother or about a mother who was cooking a ham, and she cut the end off the ham before she put it in the stove. And Somebody asked her, why do you do that? She's like, I don't know. My mom always did that. So we go to mom. Mom says, I don't know. Let's ask grandma. And grandma said, well, my pan was only this big. I had to cut the ham off to get it to fit in the pan. So they were only doing it because of the pan size was that big. Well, I think sometimes we all copy each other. And I think episode numbers are because of that. The other thing, Ross, I think, is because it's a big pride point. Like, we're up to 270 episodes on Home Gadget Geeks. Wow, I've never done 270 of anything. I'm pretty proud of that. So I like to display the episode number. The other nice thing it does is I use Pretty Links to shorten up each of my podcast episodes, because I get these really long, theaverageguy.tv / the date / podcast title. In Pretty Link, I can do theaverageguy.tv / HGG for Home Gadget Geeks, and then put the number. And it's an easy way for me to find those again if I want to go back and find them, or for other people to find them. So putting the episode numbers or tracking the episode numbers is important from a utilitarian standpoint. I don't know if it adds any value from a titling standpoint.
Right. So for people who are doing video shows, doing shows like this one on Fire Talk, they're doing blabs, they're doing Facebook Live shows where they're not just holding a camera phone, but they may be interviewing somebody coming in through an encoder or something like that. What are the advantages that they'll find if they decide to go ahead and make a podcast out of their broadcast and go through the process that you talked about in terms of distributing it and promoting it and all that? What will they see as a bonus for doing that? What's the benefit?
Great question. I think the benefit is to create community. Podcasts are great to create community around. You have this consistent topic of conversation, ideas, interviews, whatever, where you can kind of string them all together all in one. In a podcast, binge listening, that idea of binge listening came from podcasting, and so it's one of those kinds of things. By the way, I mean, Netflix and Amazon, they've all caught on to this binge listening or binge watching concept and started to provide television shows that way. You can watch just one after the other. And so the advantage is you can collect this all in a single channel and deliver it to someone and say, all these things will be available in this channel. And it just makes it a ton easier to find. If someone said to me, go to theaverageguy.tv / blah, blah, blah to watch this one, I'll never remember it by the time I get there. But if I say, if you just search for Home Gadget Geeks, chances are they'll find the channel. They can subscribe to it. They can get it on their phone, right? They can get a list. So getting all that content in one place and available for somebody to either listen to it one time or binge listen to all of them is a huge benefit.
And you're going to get much bigger numbers on a podcast because people will subscribe. They'll keep getting the downloads. And eventually, you hope. We all know that we've subscribed to podcasts and never listened to some of the ones that we subscribe to. And then we only remember that we subscribed when, our iPod or our iPhone or whatever is filled up, and then we go, which one are we going to delete? Well, I've been subscribed to this one for a year and a half and never listened to one. I guess that's the one that's going to go.
And that's utility in itself, right? If I listen to podcasts all the time and I'm like, I go through seasons of what I want to listen to, and I'm like, man, I've been listening to this for a couple of years. They're saying the same things over and over again. I want to try somebody else's podcast. And so I'll actually flush some of the ones that I'm most current with, because I've just, there's not much, what more can be said about and fill in the blank, and I might decide to listen to something new. I've been, recently I was listening to a lot of kind of variety or comedy podcasts, and I quit listening to kind of the podcast about podcasting because I had listened to everybody. We all say the same things after a while. Well, I went for about a year through that, and now I'm there's some new podcasters out there, and I'm listening about podcasting, and I'm kind of listening to some of the new ones. So it just depends what I feel like.
What are some podcasts that you like? What do you enjoy listening
around
to
podcasting, or just in general?
Just in general, like what podcasts do you go, okay, that's a really good podcast. That's one that I'm not going to miss.
The Podern Family Network has had some really good ones lately, and they're a little outside of what I was normally listening to. So Classy Little Podcast is the one that they have a cheers for something kind of theme. So cheers for tech we did one time, cheers for paper. They've done cheers for, and so it's kind of comedy and information. And I know the guests, we had them on our show. And so for me, I can just kind of unlock and not have to worry about the content or memorizing it or thinking about it or whatever. it's kind of pure entertainment for me. So that one in particular, I'm a big Radiolab fan, and recently they've come up with a new one called Near Perfect, and it's about the Supreme Court, and that has been very, very interesting to me. And so talks about the history of the Supreme Court and some of the cases that they've done. It's a brand new podcast that's kind of broken off of Radiolab, so I like that. Radiolab is still one that shows up in my podcast player. So those are a couple just kind of examples of non-podcast related, podcast about podcasting. I still listen to, I'm a big tech fan, and I'm a Windows MVP. So I listen to Windows Weekly with Leo Laporte. That's something I kind of need to listen to. Although I found a new one called Observe Tech. That's part of the Geeks Network, the network I'm on. And he takes a 2-hour show and kind of same information he does in about 30 minutes. And at 1.3 speed, I can do it in about 23 minutes. So it's a good way of, it's a good way of getting through that information. I found someone who can do it more efficiently. And in this case, efficient is better than entertainment. And so I listened to this Observe Tech podcast. Rich was just on my show last week talking about Windows 10. And so it's great. So is that to give you some idea of kind of, I'm all over the place with it.
How much editing do you do after, say, an interview show? I mean, do you take out every blip and whatever, or do you just take out if there's some point where there's
got to be huge?
Otherwise, like something like this, are you just taking it and basically putting your intro in? And
literally the conversation tonight, one take wonder. If I had a guest, sometimes I've had some guests that talk pretty slow and they put a lot of space in between their words. I've used some tricks, some concatenation on the sound to eliminate that empty space and speed it up. I've done that, but typically, nope, it's just a one take wonder. We don't, I don't do any editing. And yet I'm an editor for another show that I do separately, a consultant for it. They want perfection. And so I take out the ums and the ahs. Those are 20-minute podcasts that take me 2 hours to edit it. And I take out ums and ahs and I remove things that don't make sense. And I mess around with a WAV file to make it sound smooth. But that's a customer. That's a paying customer. And that's what they want. So I do that for them.
But something like this, you would just take it and up it goes,
disposable,
right?
Ross.
And you add
disposable data.
Right. You add theme music, you add some things like that, but that's all. Like the actual substance of it stays.
I don't think it's worth the
is.
time for what I'm doing to edit. You never get that time back, and I don't think listeners care for the most part.
Right. No, and in fact, if it's I don't know that they can necessarily tell if it's edited, but if it's so pristine, then you wonder if it's really a real conversation or not, right?
You need some of those. I think and it's the expectation of the audience, right? It's what are they expecting from the guest and what kind of quality needs to be there. And how much did Mark Maron edit the president? I bet not very much when I was there. I bet that was pretty close to being what he actually said. So no, I'm a kind of a big believer in 90% of the time it's a, live to the hard drive and a one take wonder.
Wow. So how about, for people who want to add an opening theme music or, have an intro, what do you recommend that, like, keep it short, have somebody else record the intro, just have music, a music bed? What do you think makes the best for those?
This is
those
a great
intros?
question. I think it's one of the hardest parts of podcasting, by the way. You can't use other music. You can't use licensed music, right? There are some great music sites that you can go to, and they're escaping me now, but maybe I'll remember them as we talk, where you can get royalty-free music. In other words, you can pay a little bit for it, and then they give you the rights to that music, to use in your podcast. You have to set some agreements and do some other things. That's a way of doing it. I've also found some free sites where you can contact, and actually this is what SoundCloud is good for too. Go out to SoundCloud and go through some genres and find some musicians who've already done this stuff. There's a lot of great where there's no vocals in it. It's just mixes. And man, there's some dynamite stuff out there. Contact them and say, hey, I'll give you credit on my site if you just let me use this clip. Almost 100% of the time, they'll say yes. I've gotten some great music from SoundCloud to do it that way. Or I've done this too. I've had friends that were musicians. And I said, you want to record some music for me? And they said, yes. that's great. Because you get really good personal music that, make sure they're not signed anywhere. They don't have an agent or any of that kind of stuff. But the trick to that, by the way, is play it on YouTube. Just upload the music to YouTube and turn monetization on. YouTube will tell you if it's been played somewhere before. It's just it's a great way of knowing. It's kind of a great way of knowing if it's been used or not. So those are some of the ways that I found to pick my music. Just do not use recorded. Is it RMA? I think that's the thing of it. If it's been used before and you just don't want to do it, they'll come after you at some point.
And what do people's attention spans are very short, and if they have to wait any period of time, they might just go do something else.
Maybe a couple seconds, right?
So
I wouldn't go crazy and play a 3-minute song.
Very short.
I like about 15 seconds. That's kind of what I like. Yeah.
Now, there's some people who will come on actually before the song plays and say, on today's podcast, today we're talking with Jim Collison about podcasting, or today we're talking whatever, or, they do some sort of teaser, and then they start the music. Do you think that's the best way to do it? Or the
best way, Ross? It's your way. It's the way you want to do it. I do that. That's I say, this is the Average Guy Network, and you found Home Gadget Geeks show number whatever for this date, recorded on this date, and then I start the music. By the way, I add that all in post-production.
Right.
In the live show, I just go right into my intro, right? That's how I've chosen to do it, and that's what my audience expects. I studied old-time radio years ago to see what would work when I first started podcasting. What works in radio, and what works in radio, and I think works in podcasting too, is repetition. Your listeners like to hear you doing similar stuff, especially in the intro. There's something that comes over you when you hear, especially when you like it, that when you hear it again and it's consistent and it's correct and it's right, people love that. And it kind of sets them up like, oh, I'm listening to Home Gadget Geeks. They kind of get in the right frame of mind, whatever that frame of mind is, whether it's comedy or learning or tech or whatever. So I like it. This is me personally. This idea of consistency in the opening to set your customer or set your listener into the state. Like it's a little Pavlovian, where the dog, you ring the bell, you start the show, you do something similar, you put them in the right frame of mind, and then you can go off and do your stuff. Again, my preference. I have some friends that do a podcast called Agnostic Tech. They just talk about whatever they want. They literally start by just talking. There's no intro. They're kind of irreverent to podcasting. So that, they're trying this style. And then about 10 minutes in, they go, oh, by the way, this is the Agnostic Tech Podcast. We're part of the Geeks Network, blah, blah, blah. And actually, I think they use, now that I'm thinking about it, I think they use the Skype, the do, a Skype, that. I think that's their opening music. And that's what they like, right? I mean, so why not? Why not?
So the last question I'll ask you, because we have some people who are already into podcasting and further along. At what point, either in your downloads, in your community building, whatever, can you start to think about, maybe I could get a sponsor for this? Maybe I could make a couple dollars, or at least help defray the costs of thing and having a website and all the things that go into it, right?
It depends on how good of a salesperson you are. So like, we always say there's a 10,000 download, like for most companies, they always say 10,000. Listen, very few people have 10,000 downloads, right? It's not a reality. A good chunk of us sit in the 1 to 2,000 category. I think if we were honest with ourselves, we're in that 1 to 2,000. There's another group that are in that 500 to 1,000. Great. You know what? That's actually a really good audience if you got that. Home Gadget Geeks has 1,000. I'll just be very, very transparent. We're 1,000 to 1,500, depending on how you count the numbers and all those kinds of things. And I was able to get a sponsorship from LastPass because they fit our audience, and I did something that made sense. I had them sponsor an app. So our Home Gadget Geeks app, if you go to homegadgetgeeks.com, you'll see a site I set up just for mobile. And you go in and it's got subscribe on Android and subscribe on iTunes. And all I really want them to do with people with big fat fingers is be able to push those buttons and subscribe, right? That's what I want them to be able to do. LastPass sponsored that, and they went in, and so it made sense. And it's a sponsorship that They helped me pay for the app as well as some advertising on the app itself, and it was a great sponsorship. I've had Talk.to has been a sponsor of the program. They sent a whole bunch of T-shirts. We gave them away at a meetup, and they paid for some travel for me so I could do some things for them. Well, that's a sponsorship, right? And so, Ross, I don't have 10,000, and yet I'm able to do sponsorships. So, if you can find an advertiser that has your listeners as their customers, and it makes financial sense for them to lose money from their account and you gain money in your account, that's an awesome relationship, right? That works. So it's not so much about numbers or the amount of downloads or whatever. It's how well can you sell yourself to that sponsor, and how engaged is your audience in what you're doing. If you say something and they do it, man, everybody loves that. And so it just depends. I these people who say it's got to be 10,000 or whatever, I kind of go, well, and then sometimes you could have 10,000 and you can't sell crap. And so, even that number doesn't matter for sponsorship. Right. And if you're going to go after sponsors yourself, you got to be able to sell. You got to be confident in what you're doing and be able to sell it. And so can you do that? Can you show value and be willing to set up a price list that you hold to? And then can you sell it? If you can't do it, it doesn't matter how many you have.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Jim. This hour flew by. Thank you so much.
Too fast.
I know. I always enjoy listening to your shows, and you can catch him on the averageguy.tv is the website where all his shows are. Also, Ask the Podcast Coach, at least for now, 10:30 a.m. Eastern on Blab, but you might be checking out Fire Talk and some other options.
Maybe.
And what else? Anything else coming up?
Well, I would say for the Gallup stuff, if you're interested in what we do from an enterprise perspective, in other words, taking podcasting to work, head over to coaching.gallup.com. You don't have to be a coach over there, but coaching.gallup.com is where we post, and you can see we do it all wrong. It's on a blogger site. We use YouTube. I use Spreaker for my audio. According to, the gurus, we're not doing it right, but it works. And I mentioned the numbers earlier in the show. So if you want to see how we do it from an enterprise perspective, if you have any questions or you want to track me down, I'm always open to email, jim@theaverageguy.tv. Love to answer your questions. Dave and I do free podcast consulting on Saturday mornings at Ask the Podcast Coach. So if you want to jump in and join us, love to have you.
Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. We'll be back Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here. It's Livestream News, and we have Monique Hoffman, host of Cue the News. There's a few things going on, a couple of political conventions the last couple of weeks. Should find plenty to talk about. So please do join us Thursday night, and have a great evening, everybody.